Hello, I'm Bill McDonald of the Charlotte County Libraries and History. Welcome to Ode to Local Writers. And our guest is Dennis Clark. Welcome, Dennis.
Thank you.
And you are the author of Old Gold. And I think what's unique about you as an author is that you write in many genres. Would you like to tell us a little bit about some of the ones you work in?
Sure. A lot of them are action-adventure, historical action-adventure, pirates and buried treasure. I get a murder mystery. I got a little romance. It's little because that's all I know about romance. And I got a real thick one on China. It was about 2 years of research. And have fun writing. It's what I do to stay out of trouble.
And how did you get started in writing, Dennis?
I had a job as a consultant. Oftentimes, in order to get people to understand the business principle, I would tell a story out of my history in the military or in South America or Europe or whatever, and that put them on the edge of their seat. And I said, well, maybe I got a story to tell.
And are there any writers that you've read that have inspired you or been role models?
Yeah, I have two favorites.
Okay.
Ernest Hemingway and Jack London.
Pretty good pair.
Yeah.
Pretty good pair.
Well, they kind of said you got to get out there and go do it.
Right.
That's what I did with my life, and that's why I have stories to tell.
Absolutely. And just if you can briefly tell us what the writing process is like for you, Dennis.
Well, as I mentioned, I do it to stay out of trouble. It's meant to be fun. And so I may write 2 hours, 3 hours, take a break if I want for a couple of days, sort things out in my head. I generally know the story before I start. I know the beginning, I know the guts, I know the end. And it's just a matter of sorting it out in my head and then writing it down. Sometimes I need a day or two to sort it out and say, okay, here's the next step, the next turn that we want to put into the story.
Sure.
But I don't try to overdo it. Like I said, it's fun, it's entertainment, and people seem to like the stories. The style is easy to read, kind of the Jack London or Hemingway style. Hemingway style, let's say, more like The Old Man and the Sea. Not some of his others where a paragraph could be a page long, a sentence could be a page long.
Yes, right. And before we start, we mentioned about Old Gold. If you could tell us a sentence or two about some of the novels you have on display here.
Okay. Hard Way Home was my first book, and it was resulted from some experiences I had in Vietnam. It took about 40 years to digest it. And I realized in my going around there were POWs. We made the pilots famous, but the guys on the ground weren't, and we left some behind. And so that's that story. Trap, I was working with the Marine Patrol, is a story about the Mexican cartel guys that were stealing the boats out of Florida.
Oh, wow.
4 boats stolen. So that's basically mostly a fictionalized true story. The Married Deer is this Treasure of Lima. It's a true story. I saw a little article in a boating magazine about the Treasure of Lima. No one had ever researched it. I researched the heck out of it, and I wrote the story. Flickering Light is about electricity. It's kind of a science fiction thing. And The Detectives is a murder mystery. It's a woman serial killer. Photon is a story about some guys that worked in the defense industry, and the guy was clever enough never to put anything on the computer, but the Chinese picked up on it via some emails. So they said, we'll capture these guys when they go on this retirement cruise into the Mediterranean.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And the Chinese used the Pakistanis, but they were like the Keystone Cops. It's an interesting story.
Sure.
The kidnapping of Jill is based on some true events of what they call K&R, kidnap and ransom, out of Costa Rica. I lived in Costa Rica for about 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
And so had the background to write that story. Hunted is kind of a stand your ground thing, but they just picked on the wrong guy. And Overwhelmed is research on China and their emergence and dominance in the Pacific Basin. And that's why I call it Overwhelmed, China's Pacific Basin, and their desire to get food to feed their people. They're expanding their military and economic footprint.
Sure.
And then Old Gold is a local story.
Oh,
It's about
okay.
Jose Gaspar, and we'll talk about it.
Yeah, well, you mentioned Old Gold. Let's, if you could talk about it and maybe read a few excerpts from your...
Okay. There's two types of gold. There's new gold and old gold. New gold is what you dig up and process. Old gold is what somebody else dug up and processed and lost. And so ship went down, they buried the treasure, didn't find it. It's treasure. This is a story of Jose Gaspar's treasure. I had 4 friends that I hung out with. They had really unique personalities. I talked to them, said I wanted to use their personalities in writing this book. I did. The characters in the book are Joe, Gus, Robbie, and Bev. They're kind of old codgers. And Joe liked to share stories about Florida and the things that he knew. And one of the stories was that in 1821, Florida bounced back and forth between Spain, England, Spain, U.S., Spain. Finally, it became a permanent territory in the U.S. in 1821. And the government wanted to get people here, and they wanted settlers here. But one of the problems was the pirates. So they sent down the U.S. Constitution, a warship, to chase the pirates out of Florida. And in Charlotte Harbor, we had 2 kinds of pirates. We had English pirates and Spanish pirates. The English pirates were on Pine Island, the north end of Pine Island. The Spanish pirates were in Boca Grande. And so, knowing that the Americans were going to chase them out, they needed to hightail it to the Caribbean, the English pirates made it out. Jose Gaspar was packing up to go. In fact, he just packed up a box of sealed bottles that he had put in his cabin on his ship, the Flor Blanca, which was anchored or docked in the little cove there in Boca Grande, right by where Wooden Marine is, old Wooden Marine. And just as this box was loaded on the ship, the man up in the crow's nest, the lookout, shouted out that there was a sailing ship coming up the coast. And he said, "What kind?" And they said, "It's a merchant ship." Well, he thought this was an opportunity to provision the ship before he took off. So he called for all hands. And all but the sick and old boarded his ship, and they went out to capture this merchant ship. And the battle didn't go well for Jose Gaspar on his brig, the Flor Blanca. It said, Jose Gaspar saw that it was over. He did not want to be hung. He wrapped some chain around his waist. He stood on the rail and declared, "Gasparilla dies by his own hand, not the enemy's." He jumped over the side and disappeared into the depths. Thus ended the life of Jose Gaspar. Gasparilla. So, the crew of the Enterprise captured the crew of the Flor Blanca and hung them all. Then those on shore, when they saw that their captain had lost, fled into the mangroves. They did not want to be caught. So the Enterprise, they captured the ship, and then they went in to the cove there, and they raided his village. They were looking for this treasure. It wasn't on his ship, so where did he have it hidden there? They couldn't find it. So they burned the village. The Enterprise sailed north and continued chasing out pirates, sailed up towards Tampa. And part of the crew was put on the Flor Blanca to take it to San Juan, Puerto Rico, where it would be sold in auction. On the ship, to do repairs, they put the ship's carpenter and his helper, whose name was Hawthorne. Hawthorne was ordered to clean out the captain's cabin and throw all the rubbish over the side. Well, young Hawthorne took an interest in these dark bottles that he had in a box. And so that was his bounty from the capture of the ship. And so they went to Puerto Rico. Eventually the Enterprise came into Puerto Rico. They were reunited with their ship, and their ship then sailed back to Annapolis. Hawthorne's enlistment in the Navy ended. And so as a carpenter, he built a house there in Annapolis and stuff. Now Joe, one of our characters, one of the old codgers in our book, liked to go antiquing. And he went to this antique shop and he got talking about Florida. And the owner says, oh, my great-great-great-great-grandfather was on the Enterprise when they captured the Flor Blanca. In fact, he brought back some bottles and they had them down in the basement. Well, Joe was interested, linked to Florida. He wanted to get them, but they didn't want to sell them. A couple of years later, the family said, hey, we're selling the house. Do you want the bottles? So he bought them and flew up north. He brought the bottles home, and he had Gus and Robbie and Bill over to examine these bottles, and they shook them. There's something in here in these dark, dark bottles. And they held them up to the light. There's something in here. So they took a string, wrapped a cigarette lighter around it, lit it, and cracked the bottles. And very gingerly, on 3 of the bottles, pulled out some tattered directions. They weren't maps, it was directions. It was a distance and a compass heading. And then one of them, it was just crumpled paper. It was gone, disintegrated. But then they had a square bottle. And on the square bottle, there were some scratchings, and they took a food dye and rubbed it in it. And they could see those 4 sides had the same drawings of the 3 directions they had. So they assumed the 4th one was the one that had disintegrated. And so now they had a puzzle. You got directions. You don't know where they go. You don't know where they start. So Joe said, well, let's do this. What I'll do is I'll just say, in the scale of my nautical chart, I'll put the directions out, and I'll put the distances out, and I'll see where it fits. And voila, when he moved to where Jose Gaspar's ship would have been anchored in the cove, it fit. It pointed to the mangroves to the south, to the little peninsula to the east, to the golf course to the north, and to the sandbar to the north. And they said, we have a map. We know where the treasure is. So they went treasure hunting. So as they were thinking about treasure hunting, they were chatting in the parking lot before getting in the car. Joe quietly tendered, I hate to rain on this parade, but there's something else we have to consider. Like what? Questioned Gus sarcastically. Well, assume we can go take this gold, but there are legal ramifications. Like what? Repeated Gus. Like I've been checking, the East Treasure is on private land. He paused and added, that means the owner could get us for trespassing and negate our claim. Gus simply said, we don't tell him. We found the gold. They'll never miss something they never knew they didn't have. We don't tell them. Joe rolled his eyes and added, the South Treasure owns public wetlands. Gus said, so? Well, we could get in trouble for the environmental impact. He added, there's just no viable defense in the law or the public on this. Gus was that, and we just don't tell them. Okay? So they went treasure hunting. But, and they found some. They found a lot. So they decided they would get it checked out. So they go to one of the local pawn shops in Port Charlotte. And the store manager was immediately interested. He leaned over and carefully held each item, turning each over and over. Then took his jeweler's look and examined them in detail. He had a piece of gold, a piece of silver, and a little gold bar. Store manager looked at them. The date on the silver pieces they ate was 1790. He commented, These Spanish reales were common currency in the early United States and throughout the Caribbean, even parts of Europe. And pirates captured booty, added Gus. The jeweler gave Gus a weary look and asked, "So you want to sell the items?" Robbie and Gus noted affirmatively. He weighed each item. Okay, you have 8 ounces of silver and 4 ounces of gold in the little bar, and 1 ounce in the coin. So the bullion value is $120 and the silver is $5,000 for the gold. You have counter gold, Gus, but these are rare artifacts, antiques. What's the wholesale value to you? So the jeweler went through his calculation and came up with $7,000 total. Gus eagerly agreed, that's better than he had, because we have lots of them. Robbie gave Gus a shocked and dirty look. The jeweler held up both hands with his palms out, chest high, as to push them away. I'm not interested. So that caused a problem. The jeweler wanted in. So as they walked out to the parking lot, the owner of the pawn shop had 2 goons follow him. They had another problem. As they had been searching around, there's 2 wayward FWC officers that got interested, and they wanted in. So, anyway, the treasure was consisted of gold, silver, and lots of emeralds out of Colombia. And the metals have no traceability if they're melted down. So they created a cover story. They bought 2 mines, gold and silver mines in Nevada, defunct mines for nothing. And they proceeded to melt down and sell, wholesale out the gold and silver. And they paid taxes. So there was no legal ramifications for undisclosed income. But the goons and FWC were closing in on them. Their house had been raided a couple times by both the goons and FWC. And they, there was no treasure at the house. It was just all the treasure hunting gear. And the site at the golf course, as you go into Boca Grande, was their last site. And they had put a tent up, and they worked under the tent at night. So the last day, they decided to leave the tent there. They salted the ground with a few coins here and there. And sure enough, at daylight, as they were leaving, the goons swooped in to try to steal what they could. It was nothing much. Well, FWC, our 2 wayward officers, saw them and thought they were raiding, they were going to close in on our old codgers. Instead, they got the goons. Well, the goons were felons. They had guns, so that was illegal. They had Spanish treasure. They didn't have licenses to hunt. They were on private property. So they were busted, and our FWC officers were heroes. So anyway, these guys went through the process. They got lots of treasure, and they decided to reinvent themselves. They had some money. Joe liked his house, his waterfront house, so he just bought a cruising boat. Bev, she liked her little condo, and she was really frugal. She became a cruise queen, and she did last-minute cruises out of Miami. Gus moved to the Keys, grew long hair, and bought a Harley. Robbie moved to Naples and opened a jewelry store. And they all became partners in the jewelry store. The name of the jewelry store was Old Gold, and they had a lot of emeralds they needed to liquidate. And so that's the story of Old Gold.